You're standing at a zoo enclosure. A crow on the other side of the glass goes completely still. It isn't looking at the flamingos. It isn't looking at the food dish. It's looking directly at you. Not past you. At you. Studying your face the way you study someone's profile before a first date. Scrolling just a little too long. And the question that hits you, the one nobody actually answers, isn't can animals think? It's something weirder. What exactly is going through that crow's head about you, specifically, right now? Here's the thing. This isn't a philosophical trick question. It's a measurable one. And the answer dismantles something most people assume without ever questioning it. For most of human history, the working assumption was simple. Animals see us as a threat or a food source, a predator or a provider. That's it. The full range of how a non-human brain could classify a human being. End of list. It's tidy. It's wrong. And the evidence that it's wrong has been piling up for decades in field studies and behavioral labs and one very famous garbage dump in Japan. In 2008, researchers at the University of Washington ran a series of experiments led by John Marsluff, a wildlife biologist who had been studying crow cognition for years. The setup was deliberate and genuinely a little unsettling. Researchers wore specific latex masks while trapping and banding wild crows on campus, a mildly stressful experience for the birds by any measure. Then, days, weeks, sometimes years later, different people wore those same masks while walking through the campus, without doing anything threatening at all. Just walking. The crows remembered the masks. Specifically, they mobbed the wearers, scolded them, dive-bombed them, and recruited other crows who hadn't even been present during the original trapping to join in. By the end of the study, the hostility had spread to crows who had only learned about the dangerous face secondhand, from watching other crows react. The crows were not just recognizing individual human faces. They were teaching each other which faces to distrust. They had, essentially, built a social record of a specific human's behavior and passed that reputation through their community. Now here's the complication. Because if you take that result at face value, you might think, okay, crows are tracking threats. Sophisticated, sure, but still basically the predator or provider model, just with better memory. That's where it gets genuinely strange. The same lab ran follow-up studies, and some crows that had been trapped, the stressful experience, began leaving gifts on the porch of a researcher's home. Shiny objects, a button, a scrap of metal, pieces of food. Ethologists call this gifting behavior, and it's documented across corvids in multiple studies. The crows weren't just remembering a bad experience. They were also, apparently, trying to build a positive relationship with a specific human they recognized. That's not threat detection. That's social management. That's something that looks uncomfortably like a reputation strategy. But stop. Because before you decide crows are basically running a PR campaign about you personally, here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind right now. Is this actually about you as a human? Or just about you as a large moving object that sometimes does things? Turns out, that question has a specific answer. And it changes the whole picture. In 2019, a research group published findings from long-term observations of wild bottlenose dolphins off the coast of Western Australia. These dolphins had been interacting with a particular set of researchers for years. Not being fed, not being trained. Just coexisting near research boats during ongoing ecological surveys. Over time, the dolphins began exhibiting what the researchers described as selective affiliative behavior. They would approach specific individual researchers by boat, ignore others on the same vessel, and in some cases engage in what could only be described as play directed at a specific person. Not the boat. Not humans generally. Specific people. By face, by voice, or by some combination the researchers couldn't fully isolate. The dolphins, in other words, weren't processing human as a category. They were processing individuals within that category. Which means somewhere in a dolphin's social map, there is a slot that functions something like a named contact, a specific person with a specific history. That's the same cognitive architecture we use for keeping track of friends. Here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part most people have never heard, which is wild because it changes how you think about every animal interaction you've ever had. A 2021 meta-analysis published in Animal Cognition reviewed decades of research across species, primates, elephants, corvids, cetaceans, and domesticated animals, looking specifically at how non-human animals categorize and differentiate between individual humans. The finding that kept surfacing across completely unrelated species and unrelated labs was this. Most social animals do not process humans as a species in the abstract. They process us the way they process members of their own social group. Individual by individual. Reputation by reputation. Relationship by relationship. The category human often doesn't exist as a meaningful unit inside their cognitive model at all. You're not filed under human. You're filed under you. Now hold on, because this is the 70% mark, and this is the finding that reframes every single thing that came before it. What this means is that the question, what do animals think of humans, is built on a false premise. It assumes a collective answer exists. But for a crow, a dolphin, an elephant who has spent years near a specific researcher, or a dog who runs to the door when one specific car pulls in and not the neighbor's identical car, the question isn't, what do animals think of humans? It's what does this animal think of this human? And those are completely different questions. Researcher Joyce Poole, who has spent over 4 decades studying African elephant behavior in Kenya and Tanzania, documented individual elephants who showed clear, sustained positive responses to specific humans they had encountered years earlier, and clear avoidance behavior toward humans who matched the general profile of poachers in their region. Not all humans. Not unfamiliar humans as a class. A specific threat profile, tracked individually over time. The elephants were not generalizing. They were remembering. The framework that ties all of this together is what animal cognition researchers sometimes call individual recognition theory. The idea that in socially complex species, the cognitive machinery for tracking individuals in your own group is the same machinery that gets applied to other species you interact with regularly, including us. It's not a special module for understanding humans. It's the same social brain doing what it always does, building models of individuals, tracking their behavior, and updating those models based on new evidence. We just happen to be one more individual in the social environment. In other words, we're not being categorized as human. We're being evaluated as neighbors, as recurring characters in a social world that doesn't have a species membership requirement. That crow at the zoo wasn't watching you because you're a human. It was watching you because you specifically walked up and stood there. You're in the data now. You're a specific face in a crow's memory. And whether that goes well or badly for you depends entirely on what you do next. A button left on a porch. A dolphin that ignores 17 people to approach one. An elephant who remembers a voice from 12 years ago. The gap between animal minds and human ones has always been smaller than we assumed. And not because animals are almost human. Because we were always just animals too, walking into each other's social worlds and getting filed accordingly. What animal has surprised you by remembering you? Drop it in the comments, because this thread is going to be wild. They were watching us the whole time.